Hello, my name is David Schuler, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the city of Mexico. I'm going to be talking to you about the architecture, the history, the food, and the culture. I want to first start off that this picture right here is a man by the name of Moctezuma. He was ruler in Mexico during the Aztec Empire from 1502 to 1520. And a lot of the people described him as a very indecisive ruler simply because he didn't know how to handle situations in times of war, such as the Spanish invasion. Of course, he had two wives, and eventually, sadly, he became one of the victims of the smallpox epidemic starting from the 1520s. He died in 1520, but when he died, his brother eventually became his successor, but he also died from smallpox 80 days after his reign. Of course, when this outbreak spread it into Mexico, and of course different parts of the world, the cause of this was mainly because of foreigners who were coming from different parts of the world, simply in a time where they were curious about the world, if it was round, or they're curious of the production of maps and all that type of stuff. They wanted to sort of like explore like Columbus, and thanks to that, a lot of the people from different parts of where they originally lived at brought this virus over, and the Aztecs really sadly started to depopulate. Now, the Aztecs have never experienced this disease from smallpox because they had, thanks to that, they had a weak immunity. And of course, the Spaniards, from centuries of previous exposure towards this disease, their immunity was resistant to it. Now, what's interesting is the Spaniards didn't know they had a strong immunity. However, they did know that the Aztecs had a weak immunity, thus taking advantage of their willpower. They knew that since the population of the Aztecs were greatly affected with disease, they felt it was an opportunity of weakness for the Spaniards to take over Mexico. And of course, when this disease became widespread, a lot of the Aztecs at that time believed that it was a punishment from their gods for whatever action they made, whatever mistakes they had made. Maybe because they thought they were being stubborn in certain things, or maybe because they weren't welcoming, and they were narcissists to where they were living, and they took everything in consideration only to themselves instead of others around them. Whatever it was, whatever mistakes they made, they thought that it was their God taking offense to it. Thus bring them thinking that it was the reason for the smallpox outbreak. And this in turn allowed the Aztecs to become more spiritual, and the Spaniards eventually were able to rule Mexico after that. Now this right here is a demonstration of the most famous holiday. It's called El Día de los Muertos. And what this does, this celebration usually occurs right after the American holiday of Halloween. And this is a celebration of the dead, of families that reunite with their loved ones. And it starts on the 1st of November. The 1st of November consists of them believing that they're reuniting with their children. They're the first ones supposedly believing to come down on that day to reunite with them. And of course on the second day, they believe that, the children usually as well stay down here, but they also believe it's allowing permission from the spiritual world for adults to come as well to reunite with their families. And they believe that the gates of heaven are opened on those particular 2 days. On the final day of the dead, especially in the afternoons, people go to the cemetery where the loved ones are buried. And this is the area where they play cards, or they clean the tombs, and of course, they like to reminisce about their loved ones, what they did, what their mission on earth was, how they died, sort of like to honor them. As well, some of the people as well, for culture reasons, before the holiday hits, they also like to prepare altars so their spiritual loved ones could come down and take in consideration with the food that's left for them. Because the Mexican culture believes that if you lay out any sort of nourishment like food or drinks or candies out for them, they believe that for the rest of their lives, the families of the late relative that was once alive is going to be well protected for eternity, as long as they keep up with the holiday tradition and making sure their loved ones' spirits are in healthy capacity. And sometimes there's these things called sugar skulls, which I think is pretty awesome. They usually, sometimes they're eaten, but most of the time they'll usually just be left out for the loved one. And sometimes the sugar in these skulls are so strong that some of the relatives usually keep the skulls after 50 years. That's what's sort of cool as well. Now the foods that are served in Mexico, of course one of them is tortillas. This is something that you could sort of see at Publix, or you could also make homemade. And it's a thin, uneven, what do they say, unleavened flatbread, and it's made from a corn, which they call maize, and it's served with chicken, rice, and cheese, and is also used the same breading to make enchiladas. A lot of the Mexican cultures also like to use spicy stuff like chili peppers, and they usually put this on fruits and sweets. Now, according to this one person who's from Mexico, a lot of the statistics say that that if something happened to chili peppers or hot sauce, the Mexican culture believes that if none of the spicy foods ever existed, they wouldn't feel Mexican, which is kind of cute in a way, because technically all these spicy foods, to a degree, does make a person part of the Mexican culture, because a lot of the Mexicans, again, they love anything with taste. And of course, you also have the most famous dish that's served here in a lot of restaurants is tacos. Now tacos, they date back to the ancient Mexican culture where utensils weren't widely used. A lot of the people during this time period ate with their hands instead of tools. And but the earliest taco that was ever recorded was in the 1500s when it was wrapped with fish. It wasn't like modernized like it is now, where you have meat, lettuce, tomatoes, cheese. Now it was basically like a simple cuisine. It was just a breading with fish in it. And but later on, throughout certain decades, they started like figuring out, oh, this tastes better if you put meat in it, or guacamole, or lettuce, and tomatoes. And the shell in this cuisine ranges from soft to hard. Now there's also a lot of variety of tacos out there, which I didn't really know existed, before I did this project. Is you have breakfast tacos that some of the Mexican people like to eat over there. They love to eat these breakfast tacos with eggs and cheese. That's what's sort of interesting about it. Now I wouldn't really eat that sort of type of stuff, because that stuff would upset my stomach in the mornings. I like to have something simple. But that stuff right there, you could sort of tell, would sort of give you like cholesterol problems because of the cholesterol associated with the eggs and the dairy stuff. But as well, excuse me, there's also not only breakfast tacos, you have the fried tacos, and you have the deep dish tacos where it's like served on like some sort of fillet dish and all that type of stuff. But I just find it interesting that there's more than one type of cuisine like this. And you also have the frijoles, which means beans, that a lot of the Mexican culture like to eat. They usually like to process it in canned or dried form, and they love to season it. To make it more tasteful. They always love to season it with salt, onion, garlic, tomatoes, and vinegar. Now that tastes good right there, and it's a very good source of protein, iron, magnesium, as well as using this ingredient like the beans to make a dish called as well refried beans, and that's also as common as frijoles. The beans, how they made is they're dried, and then overnight, within 24-hour period, they're like soaked in some sort of moist like water or something like that, and eventually whatever liquid's formed with the bond between whatever the water and the beans, eventually that becomes some sort of liquid, and it's converted into a paste from vegetable oil. And this right there sort of gives it that white milky color to it right there. I mean, that little looks good. That almost looks like a cross between guacamole mixed with like almost, I don't know, like I think it's like a mixture between like a I don't know, it's almost like a mashed potato look to it or something, if I could like best describe it. But that stuff really looks good. Some people, and I sort of would, I'd also like to eat this with like tacos, really, you know, because it would really taste good, I believe, if you put cheese and tomatoes on it. I love tacos. um, as well, the architects, you also have the Teotihuacan, and it was considered the largest city back when it was in its prime, back in the BC times, you know, maybe as early as 5600 BC. And I believe, if my memory serves correctly, a lot of the later tribes that stayed in this city, I believe, was from 800 to 1200 AD. And this was like a religious area where people with heavy religion who would honor the god would be worshipped at this exact place. Now, what's interesting, this building architecture was it's sort of almost equivalent to a modern day housing complex, because the way it's set up is, not only is it a pyramid-like structure, but in the city there's structures that are like pyramids, where there's steps and you have many different rooms, you know, associated by levels, you know, where the stairs exist. So like if you're like on the top floor, you'd have to walk up there, and then you'd have to go to the left or the right where the rooms exist. That's what I sort of find interesting. It's like back then they were advanced in their structure. And the name Teotihuacan means, in translation, the birthplace of the gods, and they believe that this was the exact spot where the earth was created. A lot of the modern historians have also found that the heads of animals are cut off, you know, with mummified bodies, and you know, they believe that this was the Aztecs' way of offering welcome to the gods, you know, by putting the pieces of the animals in this temple. And that right here is the presentation of the City of Mexico. Hope you enjoyed it.